We are all very fortunate to be here for this next presenter. He is a horseman, an avid polo player. He had his own shoeing business for 40 years. Since then, he's been teaching at Cornell for the last 10. He's taught all over the world, reaching very many people and not only teaching them about hoof care, but changing their lives for the better. He is an industry leader, an educator, and a Hall of Famer, Steve Kraus.
I'm turned on. Okay, good. Everybody hear me? Thanks for coming. Amid the crisis that the nation is going through with people not traveling, I'm glad you're all here to support the American Farriers Association. Thank you. During the winter, upstate New York gets pretty cold. And I'm going to kind of stand over here. I'm not trying to neglect anybody, but there's having range problems with the advancer. So if anybody wants to move over this way, feel free to. Because I'm going to be standing here and I'm going to demonstrate a few little things. Yeah, it gets pretty cold in upstate New York in Ithaca. And what little hair I have, I let it grow out a little bit. And so about a week ago, I went down to the barber to get cleaned up a little bit, so I, look a little nicer for this deal here. And so I said, I'm going off to speak at a conference. Clean me up and try and make me look a little more intelligent. She turned around and stood in front of me and said, honey, that's going to be a tough job, but I'll do my best. So we're going to talk about the hind end here. So we're talking about proper geometry, and I'm not trying to get fancy with you, but for shoeing the hind end. But really, shoeing the hind end is a combination of a geometry problem, which is the study of shapes, and how those shapes bear the load, which is the study of physics. And, these are physical forces, and this is, really not that fancy at all. So, how should we look at the hind end? The hind end is often neglected because we approach the horse from the front. We tend to want to make eye contact when we see the horse, and the tail will usually hide what we need to see on the hind end. So that's a problem because we're not even looking at the hind end properly. And so, do we want to run up and pull the tail out of the way on a strange horse, which is, obviously not to do. However, we need to kind of move that tail sometimes to see what's going on back there. So, why is understanding how the horse uses the hind end important? How does the hind end work? What constitutes proper hind end movement? What disciplines in sports is the proper hind end important? What happens when the hind end is not correct? And how do we help the hind end with shoeing and trimming? Shoeing the hind end takes strain off the front end. And so where I work now in the veterinary hospital at Cornell, we see a lot of horses coming in with front end lameness. And often the focus is there because, as I said, we tend to focus on the front a lot. And the horse maybe has some things going on, but they're having a hard time blocking them out to move straight. They may spend some money on radiographs, but the horse is really, they can't find anything. And I happen to walk by and look at, and I say to the vet, I wonder how you can do a lameness exam with this horse's hind end so bad. And they start looking and look, and let me shoe this hind end, or let's work on this hind end a little bit, or examine it. And sure enough, even though the horse is presenting as a front end lameness, so that's where the focus is, the hind end is what the problem is because the horse is bearing too much weight on the front end because he's not using the hind end. Sometimes it's conformation, sometimes the shoeing wasn't up to what it needed to be because we tend to neglect that. So if we take the strain off the front end by shoeing the hind end properly, guess what? Front end problems tend to be less or go away. Next slide. So we have this triple threat, as I call it. Unsuitable conformation, inaccurate trimming at times, poor fitting shoes at times. And that is a combination for lameness and underperformance. So our goals today are understanding how the hind end works, learning where conformation defects come from, recognizing defects in the mature horse, what are the consequences to soundness, and shoeing strategies to manage these conformation defects, things that we can have an influence on. And so Dr. Stephen O'Grady has talked about this, and he and I are on the same page. And I'll quote from this, you probably can't read it. Farrier for the hind end limbs of the horse has not been studied to the extent of Farrier on the front limbs. And because we focus on the front, there is minimal information published on clinical research and information on the hind end. So that's interesting. Where, you know, and Mike was just showing in his really great lecture a lot of front end pictures, didn't he? A few from hind end that he took, but a lot of the stuff out of the books is front end stuff. And so this will paraphrase some of his other stuff he's talked about. Hind limbs do not suffer the same foot damage as forelimbs due to the fact that front feet bear more weight versus the hind limbs that are used to propel the horse forward. So we do have different things going on. It's not the same. Next. So let's think about how the horse propels himself forward with the hind end. If we start all the way at number 1, we have our impact, and that you see we have forces hitting the foot and leg from forward and from down. In the next step, we are in the support phase, where now these forces are going up the leg. And as we get into the thrusting phase, guess what? They reverse and start pushing back down. Then we get into the swing phase, and it all goes behind the horse, so it continues to push down. And then when we protract to bring that leg back up, everything comes back up. So you see what's happening here? It's a push-pull, push-pull, push-pull with the reciprocal apparatus and all that. So we need proper physics and physics will only work if the geometry is correct, because we have tremendous forces. As Mike just talked about, if a horse is at a walk, it's a lot different than a horse at an extended trot or a gallop. Next. So what we learned from draft horses, I've shot a lot of draft horses in my younger years, and there's a lot of confusion about how to shoe the hind end of a draft horse, and the show ring has turned it into a big fad. They've overdone what is actually a correct principle. And so if you look at this horse here, this Clydesdale, we need to have the base under the hips. So that's the idea of a flare on the outside. That's the idea of a shoe that fits full on the outside for any horse. So when a horse has a load up above, there needs to be a base to support it, and a lot of times that's neglected. So pulling power comes from the right geometry of how the hind end is put together. The base needs to be under the hips. The function is the same for every horse. It's just used differently as the horse is in different gaits or uses. But it does, the hind end does, as you saw, work like a piston. Push, pull, push, pull. Next. So the proper hind end, proper geometry produces good movement and soundness by managing physical forces. Horseshoes maintain and enhance the trim. So no matter what we trim, we can help or enhance it with what we do with the shoes. And horseshoe modifications improve what we cannot trim. So we're putting metal where the foot isn't and needs to be, or we're changing ground reaction forces. Next. So it all starts with the trim. Inaccurate trim cancels beautiful shoes. So we have to be good at making two different things. We have to be good at understanding what we need to trim, and then we have to be good at what we put on the foot. Two different things, and teaching that at once is a really hard thing for me to do, because we're teaching two completely opposite things that have to meld together. Next. Trim is the foundation for all good geometry. Horseshoes protect the trim and improve the geometry and aid in the weight distribution. So we're talking about supporting the load. Horseshoes place metal where the foot isn't but needs support. So if we talk about this anterior-posterior balance, if we look at these key points, we got an arrow right here on that sagittal section, and that's going where Duckett's dot is, so we can line that up on the extensor process. That's the insertion on the top of the extensor tendon. and it's the insertion of the deep flexor tendon on the coffin. They're putting the line. If you want to learn more about this, just Google Duckett's dot. There's some great information. This is just a guideline to help us think. We can put external markers on the foot and map this out. And here's our modification to achieve what we call the golden ratio at 1/3, 2/3 balance. Next slide. And you can see I'm using my calipers here. I got a 1/3, 2/3, if we could flip it over for the front line. But on a lot of feet, this point from heel support, where we might be putting the shoe, which we can trim, quite often equals a toe length. It's not exact, but it's a very good guideline to think about. If you learn how to read this properly and see where you want to put that support if the horse is lacking it, especially on the hind foot, where we have more ability to put a little more shoe out there. Next. Here's another one. Here's a before and after trim. So we call this geometric trimming to achieve the golden ratio. The before trim, you can see I have too much in front of that mark where Duckett's dot is, and not enough where the horse is actually landing and supporting. And then if you go behind on that fourth mark, we have a lack of support. And just after the trim, now we are on the 1/3, 2/3 ratio, and the posterior line is much smaller. So we can achieve a lot with the trim. Next. So what affects hind end movement? A lot of things affect it. Conformation is one. Conditioning and training of the horse. A horse that's fit is going to move a bit differently than a horse that's not fit. Traction, how we put the shoes, traction devices is going to affect this. How much slide, how much slip, how much grip. Support, we talk about putting metal where the foot is and needs to be. And the rider has a huge effect. The rider, if it's an unbalanced rider, or a rider that's too heavy for the horse, or a rider that puts the horse on the front end, sometimes we can't shoe good enough for some of the people that are riding these horses. So we also have to remember that. So don't assume responsibility for things that are out of your control. Next. And here are the sports where it's really important. Obviously it's important for all the horses, but dressage. If a horse doesn't have a good hind end, it's not going to make it. Same with jumping, polo, reining, racing. A horse can run pretty fast without a hind end, but when I go to the track and bet on horses, I'm looking at the hind ends and I cross off the list all the ones that I know can't run because they have a lousy hind end. That's the first thing I look at. And pulling and driving, those horses have to get into the harness and get under themselves. And myself as a polo player, I look at a lot of horses, I've ridden lots of horses, and I've done a lot of the experiments. And I've ridden horses that I didn't like the hind end, I got on them anyway, and I go, now I know why I don't like the hind end. Because the horse is on the forehand. And if I have a horse that's on the front end, I can't train it to be use its hind end. And even if I put a harsh bit in its mouth and really sit back and yank him back, I'm just going to make him sore and he's not going to last. But if I get on the horses that I like the hind end, it's coming from behind, it's natural self-carriage, and this is a horse I'll play polo on, and I will play polo on that horse for a long time, and I'll show you some at the end here. Next. So where the problems start is in the foal. And if we look at this foal right here, we see a kind of a short tail. And I was sitting here chuckling with Mike going on because he showed some great pictures of horses with bad hind ends, but the tail is in the way. You don't really see that hock position. And we tend to start looking at these foals, and we seem to recognize a bad hind end to some degree in foals because the tail isn't there, and we have nothing to pull away because we don't want to eat a foot for breakfast, which will likely happen. So it's nice that these foal tails are nice and short, and you don't have to grab one. But the mature horse, the tail is hanging in the way. And that hides, it distorts your vision in your eye. Next. So correct hind end, we want to correct these things while they're correctable if possible if you're dealing with horses long term, because then we're just fixing, we're managing these things later on. It's so much easier to keep something from happening and breaking than fix it after it breaks. And so we have corrective trimming, of course, and medial extensions, lateral extensions, whole other talk on this stuff, caudal extensions, keep going. But plumb lines are important. And so when we're thinking about the foot, we need to think about what's coming down from above and where it's coming down. And just like this barn is a great picture of how this plumb line all of a sudden is sagging. That's what happens with horses as they have more mass. And as they get older, just like me, we get more mass coming down. And if the plumb line is off, then you have problems on where it's squashing and deforming the foot. And so if you look at the three examples in the middle, you have a neutral plumb line here, and it's well balanced where it's inside or outside that plumb line. Next. So the load's going to change with the intensity of the gait. So the horse on top that's doing a PF has to be on that hind end, and he has to do it well and to last. That horse has to be pretty well put together and pretty well shod. Extended trot going the other way too. We're changing where that goes, but we still have to support the movement better, and you have everything in between. But you can see the differences in the foot flight and how the horse has to use himself. Next. So let's talk about the faulty hind end, what I call bad geometry. So it'd be like, I guess you could go up to your clients and say, hey, your horse has bad geometry. I think I'll try and help him. Next. So we have base narrow, standing under, camped out behind, post-legged, cow hock, and what I call the right hind. And some of you have heard about this before, but we'll talk about it later. And so plumb lines are very important. If you look at the graphic there, you can see where these plumb lines are coming down from specific places. And this is where the load is coming down, and that foot has to balance this load. Next. So common thinking is most lameness is from the knees down. This is our job. Most of the in fact, we're thinking that most is from the fetlock down, and we can do something about it. And then most hind end lameness is the vet's job, because it's from the hocks up. Well, I disagree with that. I mean, not that most hind lameness are from the hocks up, but I agree. But I disagree. Can the farrier help? I say yes. We can help manage and prevent a lot of hind end problems and help the front end if we shoe the hind end right. Next. So the injuries that we see from bad physics, next, are negative plantar angles behind, ring bone, degenerative suspensory ligament disease, curve, which is a ruptured plantar ligament, osteoarthritis of the hock and stifle, and back strains and gluteal problems. Next. So the red flags that we see as farriers, and I say we feel, and Mike talked about how some of these horses will pull you into the ground and step all over you. This lack of flexion when we're lifting the hinds. Some horses are so nice and loose, we get under them and we can be there all day, and other horses are pulling our knees to our rear ends. And we just can't wait to get out from underneath them because they can't flex and they can't balance the load on the other side. The base narrow horse is always falling sideways. We have to pull them that way to keep from falling sideways with them. Flinching when hammering, especially in the winter, up north where I am, on a base narrow horse, for instance, the arthritis is on the inside of the hock. I can hammer the nails on the outside of the hock and the horse doesn't care. I start tapping the nails on the inside of the shoe and the horse is flinching. So I hold my hammer looser and I take fewer hammer strokes to drive, more hammer strokes to drive those nails because he's got arthritis. If you've ever been to the dentist and you have a toothache and he's tapping on your teeth with the end of his instrument, and this one's okay, this one's okay, and then he just taps that one and he goes, stop! Horse is feeling similar. Next, wear patterns, feet that are distorted, that are bruised, are telling you something. So pay attention to what they're telling you. And certainly that hoof distortion. Next. So let's talk about the view from the x-axis, which is standing. I'm going to take my coat off. I'm getting all warmed up here. I'm kind of like an action person. And base narrow. Your hooves are inside the plumb line of the hip. Everybody understand that? That x-axis view from the front, the x-axis is looking at the front of the horse. Now we're looking at the hind end. And if you'll think of me as a horse's rear end for a second, and I know there's at least a few people out there that do, my hocks, or my heels are the same as a horse's hocks. Everybody know that? You guys down here? Okay, this is the same. My heels are horse's hocks anatomically. So, if I stand base narrow, and my broad shoulders, look, I have an upside down triangle, very unstable, hard to stand here very long. If I open my hocks up, give myself some lateral support, I'm more comfortable. If I stand here, and base narrow, I don't want to fall off the front here, that'd be fun. If I stand base narrow, look at my left shoulder when I raise my right foot. See how immediately it falls to the side? That's why when you ride a horse that's base narrow, you feel like you're in a washing machine. You're rocking side to side. As he lifts, the hips roll. If I have a good rider that tightens me up, now I'm stiff here to do that. I'll have back strain. But if I give myself some lateral support, or if I'm built to have my hocks in a little bit better, as you'll see, now lift my right foot. Look how balanced I am. See? Can the Karate Kid do that kick? If he's base narrow, he's falling sideways, but if he's here, he can do that. Same thing, stance is important. Next. So these horses get osteoarthritis of the hock and stifle. They have that medial flare, they crush the lateral heel, and they have poor hind end engagement. Next. So here's a great example. Now these are not set up. Any of these pictures that I'm going to show you now are not set up. Every one of these pictures that I take on these horses, you'll see a couple things. Number one, somebody is holding the tail out of the way so you can see things, or it's tied up. Number two, it's from a series of pictures, taking at least 2 or 3 or 4 pictures and getting the horse to stand the same way every time. So I'm not setting this up to make a point. This is the way this horse stands, walked around same place 3 times. And you can see the upside down triangle. You can see the plumb line from the hip, the red dotted line is where it's going, and that other yellow line out on the outside just shows you where that mass is hanging. And this is not a big warm blood, this is a thoroughbred. So it's not a big mass back there. And you can see the graphic out of the textbook. You can see the anatomy, and you can see the red areas where the strains are. Next. And so, same horse after trimming, just like that. This horse has a lot of lateral flare. And I trimmed this horse, and look, and the horse never stood close again, just after the trim, not even including the shoes. So it's really amazing what we can influence with the trim and the stance. And the horse was in the hospital for front end problems. So we got finished with the horse, and they said, oh, he's moving really nice now. Did a good job on the front end. And I'm chuckling, I think I did a better job on the hind end. Next. Shoes you can use for lateral support. This is just widening the outside branch. This is nothing new. A lot of people do this. Use a fuller, use your hammer, and just a fuller fitting on the outside. And you can see the flipped over shoe I've outlined where the fit is, so it's a fuller fit if you can. Next. You can also use the Workman Ortho Kit, that little sliver, if you need more support, or if you need a very light shoe on this horse and want to put some lateral support, you don't have enough that you can forge out, you can weld that little sliver on the outside and give the horse lateral support. So you can play with this. These are just guidelines. You've got to use common sense with this stuff. Next. Ben Mangan, well, that's the next slide. We can keep this one. Here's one I forged. It's not only a good shoe to forge, fun to make, whip across bar shoe with a lot of lateral support, and that'll help with that negative palmar angle too, because sometimes the two go hand in hand. So this is a fun shoe to make. Next slide. We have shoes made by Ben Mangan and Luke Pro. They come to visit me. They make me nice shoes I can put up on the wall. Anybody want to come and visit me, come. You don't have to make a shoe, but if you make a nice one, we'll put it up on the wall. But these are just good examples of using concave or handmade shoe to just make a little more lateral support. And a lot of the shoes now come. You can buy Kirkhart's Grand Prix that has lateral support. So, you know, the St. Croix extras have right and left hinds, a little wider lateral support. Gives you something to work with that you can actually just widen that branch and fit a little wider for that base narrow horse. Believe me, it helps. It helps a lot. And I know this because the feedback from the riders tell me. They report better dressage scores, or my horse is more forward, my horse is on the bit. Next. Here's another good one here. This halflinger was in for Hocks injections, and you can see this is the stance. We couldn't make it stand any other way, and that's the solar view of the foot. And I have to trim this horse. I have to preserve some on the outside and take a lot off on the inside. Next slide. And you can see that's the Hocks arthritis, and you have a medial flare. So this is supporting everything I'm talking about here. And so where this horse had a problem, that arthritis is on the medial side, medial flare and medial arthritis. So he's going to think like this. Next. So here's the trim, lining up as best I can with the Hocks. And you can see the piece. If you go diagonal from the lateral heel to the medial toe, that's where the nippers went in the deepest. So there's a wedge shape, and it's the most nipped into the foot at the medial toe, diagonal from the lateral heel. Next. Next. So here's your shot from before, and you can see, and there's your shot after. And again, look how the horse is standing now. And the interesting thing, he's bearing weight on both feet now. Before, the horse was just standing like this. He's never comfortable, especially on that one that's all taped up from being injected. Now the horse is standing with a balanced gait just after the trim. That's what's amazing. The horses tell you that they're happier. Next. That piece was on the floor there that I took off, pointing the same. Just go back one. See that piece that was on the horse's right side. That was the way it was juxtaposed, the way it was trimmed off. Next. Sickle Hocks. Now your Z-axis view. That's your side view, standing under. And your hooves are too far and forward of the hip plumb line. You have plantar ligament strain, we call it curve. They have the run under heels, flat or negative plantar angles. Plantar is the pine. Poor thrusting ability, especially for jumping or anything where you need speed. Might make a good reining horse sliding underneath, but sometimes at a price. Next. So here's your standing under horse with two good graphics alongside it, and you can see how the plumb line is behind the buttocks, and how you've got a lot of mass behind the horse that's coming down. And this horse basically is falling backwards. These horses won't load their feet. Even if you ask them to, a good rider pulls them back there, and now the horse is going to have some strain. And so these horses are stabbing, and that's why they have the negative plantar angle, because it's deforming the foot. That's why they get that bull nose, because the horse is never fully loading, never fully challenging the deep flexor tendon. And so that's why the coffin bone is rotating backwards, because the horse is falling backwards if he has to load these feet. So, next. So here's just a quick before and after. The lines, and this is an older horse, can't improve much, but this is a horse I did regularly, and he would migrate forward, and at the end of the shoeing cycle, which was too long, you listen to Mike talking about 4 weeks, owner insisted on 8 weeks, and never could really get ahead, but as much as I'd like. Next. Shoes that are really good, extended heels. After you trim right. You should be able to trim these toes. You don't need a square toe, you need a shorter toe. And what happens sometimes when we're trimming these toes, trying to be shorter, there's some little tiny blood vessels that start to migrate forward because of the pressures and all that. And we get a little blood and go, oh, I gotta stop. Okay, stop there, but at least, I'm not saying to run blood out of these feet, but be a little more aggressive on your trim. You get rid of that toe because you got a lot of toe down there that's a lot of hoof wall there that's kicking that angle back. So extended heels work pretty good because you're putting metal where the foot isn't supported. So at least try and get them to the bulbs of the heels. They don't have to be sticking behind the horse, but support the bulbs of the heel. And you'll be surprised the difference. Next. Here's the bottom of this horse. Again, using the extended heels, we get to the 1/3, 2/3 ratio. And we need a little bit of heel extension to do that. So if we shoe this foot like it's a front foot, we're not helping this horse. We have to give him more shoe length. And a lot of the horses that I see that do have front end problems are shod too short behind. They're fitting it like it's a front shoe. Next. Another view of standing under. This is a good example. The slide on the right shows how the tail is in the way to see what you need to see, because it's just obscuring where the hocks are and where your visual plumb line can go. So if you pick the tail up, now you can see this horse is standing under. Much easier to see. So this is just common observing things. Next. And if you stand on the side view and project a line from the coronary band on these standing under horses and low-heeled horses, it projects to the belly, where it should be projecting mid-radius, at least below the elbow. So just visually project these lines, and that's going to cue you also to help these horses. And just making little subtle changes is going to make a big difference on how this horse is going to handle for the rider. And you'll get such positive feedback when you do these little things. It's amazing how people will say, I can't believe how forward my horse is, or how nice he's happy. Next. Here's the radiographs of the negative plantar angle looks like, and here's a short shoe. And see that red triangle there is a fulcrum. So when that fulcrum is there, and the horse is asked to load that hind end, that fulcrum is what the horse is falling backwards on, so that's why the horse is fighting the bit and all that, or because he's sore, he can't do it. Next. So here's more radiographs of negative plantar angles associated with standing under. When you see the slide on the right, I've got some toe I could trim off on the bottom that would at least make it a flat palmar angle, plantar angle. And the other one also, there's enough toe to trim off, it'll at least be flat, but it should be up at a positive 4 to 6 degrees of that bottom angle. Everybody know what we're talking about, the coffin bone angle on the bottom. Next. Ways you can help these horses other than extended heels, depending upon the foot. If a horse has a prolapsed frog, you got to be careful. But using a Myron McLean pad, I've welded in hard bar inserts in the extended heels, or just a Castle Plastics frog pad, having some support on that bony column really helps these horses a lot. Gets them a lot more comfortable and helps that from going worse. What we're trying to do. So some type of frog support and extended heels combination is very helpful to these horses. And it's not going to change their conformation, we're just managing it better. Next. Center bar. Workman Ortho Kit has that. That's extended heels and a center bar. That's a handy little thing, quick and easy to do if you have a welder handy. And you can see the flip side of how it's supposed to fit. Next. Here's another version of the center bar. If a horse is in deep footing regularly, of course we don't know unless we ask, but if a horse you know is consistently in very deep footing, that wide center bar and widening, almost making your onion heel type hind with a little extension, that doesn't sink in as much in that soft, impressionable footing. So this is another option. These are all options. Next. Here's a horse that came in, good example, standing under. Feet were very long, it wasn't helping. Shoes were 2 sizes too small. I wasn't there, maybe the horse had nothing to nail to. There was a lot of discrepancy between what the person that brought the horse and what I was seeing and when the horse was shod last. I didn't believe what they were telling me. But here's after trimming and shoeing, totally different stance. Toes too long, shoes too short. Give them enough shoe. Next. And just a little extended heel, and the posture corrects itself. Next. Camped out. So these are the horses that are strung out behind, The z-axis view, the horse is leaving its hind end behind. The hooves and hocks are behind the plumb line from the buttocks. They get gluteal back strain, degenerative joint disease. They get hock and stifle arthritis, and these are the horses that are just, always like, they don't get under themselves. They're just leaving things behind them. Next. And you can see on this horse here, you can look at the graphics, perfect out of the textbook, of where these plumb lines are. That red plumb line is, the mass is coming down too far ahead of the feet. And this horse is standing in the hospital, see the tail's tied up now, had a beautiful bushy tail. And I'm walking by this and I go, pick this tail up. And sure enough, I said, this horse is standing under, that's why he's got problems in front. Another example of that. And they said, all right, take him over and help him, and then the front-end problems more or less disappeared after the horse was shot right. But you can see the lack of muscle development on his croup. So this is a chronic problem, and this, again, we're managing this horse. We're just helping the horse be a little bit better than he was. So next slide. And you can see a wedge. This is one of the few times I'll use a wedge behind because it moves everything forward. But you have to usually go up a shoe size because you need that heel length. You can't just put a wedge with the same shoe size on and expect to have the right results. So the next size up shoe and a wedge, you can see the fit. And look how nice that horse is standing. Look at that plumb line again. So, and these aren't set up. After the horse is done, you can't get him standing the original way. Take lots of photographs. I try to be as unbiased as possible. Next. Here's your, shoe, a little extended, not much of an extended heel, just enough to give a little more support, a little more length, and there's your wedge. Next, good fit. Post legs. Joints are too straight, and they're usually standing way ahead of the buttocks. They're susceptible to ring bone, hip fractures, hock and stifle problems, very upright hind feet, powerful thrust, but at the cost of injury, because you have no way to dissipate all those physical forces. Next. So here's some examples off the internet, very easy to find post-legged horses, but next slide shows you the winner. I mean, who would buy that? I mean, anybody that has a working brain would avoid this horse. Because if you look at the graphics, you see all the red places where these horses have problems. And these horses are quite often base narrow also. So they're two-time losers. They're nothing but trouble. Next. You can help these horses very little, but a rocker toe, a good rocker, possibly some kind of pour-in pad or even a pad with a pour-in shock-absorbing material will help reduce some shock to the leg. The rocker toe helps just as much. No extensions. Next. Base Y, cow hocks. Next. That's your Y-axis, X and Y. So X is your plumb line from the front or rear, and Y is your rotational. And cow hocks are usually a combination of the two, rotational and base Y. So hooves are wider than the hips. They get hock arthritis. They actually work really well. They're very good off the hind end, but they get lame quick. Lateral hoof flares and cracks. And these are the horses that swing in at animated gaits. These are the mix masters as they come through. Next. So this is not even a good picture of a cow hock horse, but it's the best one I could take. And you see the right side up triangle. But you see the main thing is the hocks are in like I like, but the cannon bones are not parallel. That's the giveaway. Unparalleled cannon bones. And this horse is, not a terrible example, but the graphic shows you a little bit better. But the outside of the hip is outside the hip plumb line. Next. So if these horses are interfering, this is one way you can help them with square toe shoes and trailers. About the only time I've ever used a trailer and a square toe is on standardbred racehorses that are doing this. Next. This is more suitable, I think, of a slight trailer and a little roll toe to the outside. So you can forge or grind a toe to the outside to stop some of that interfering and and help the horse manage his gait. So there we're managing the gait more than we're doing much with support. You can fit him full on the inside to help, but at the cost of maybe catching himself or doing something. So these are hard horses to keep going for performance horses. Next. Here's the right hind, or what I call 2 left feet. And it starts with the foal. These are your windswept foals that aren't taken care of. And you can see the Hocks pretty good on the slide because the tail's short, so we see it very easily and we acknowledge it. And then as the tail grows out, we forget about looking at the Hocks. But we see a lot of these, and if you look at the red dotted line over there, that's the side that the horse doesn't like to have flexed. That's the side that's going to have the problems. If he's a dressage horse, he's going to have lousy scores going to the right. If he's a polo horse or a reining horse, he can't do things going to the right. Might make a good trail horse, but is not a performance horse. And you have to shoe each foot differently on these. So next, here's another one. This is a 17-hand quarter horse, nice big strong horse, big butt, very base narrow. Next. And where that yellow line is, he's shoving the outside lateral side of his hoof that normally they just crush. He's got that one shoved right underneath his coronary band. And a huge hematoma there. Next. And I resected some of that with a Dremel. That was right above, right at the coronary band when I started. But fit him full laterally with an aluminum heart bar, and he went right back to work as that grew down. But he was completely lame with that hoof being shoved, forced right up into the coronary band. And I've had that happen with show draft horses too that show up, where they've had too much of that lateral flare, and then they just shove it right up into the coronary band. Next. Here's, as we progress forward, here's 6 months later, that same mark is forward, lateral extension shoe on him, and the horse went back to work. And the interesting thing, he's a pretty big foot. That's like a size 2 or 3 shoe on this horse. It's a big horse. He came with aluminum shoes, very light, narrow, Victory Hind type aluminum shoes. And the owner, when I was going to put steel on him, the owner just about went crazy because a quarter horse can't wear steel. And actually said, just let me try. And the horse went out and he went back to winning everything. Imagine that with steel shoes on. Next. So here's our proper geometry as we're winding up here. These drawings are taken out of old books, just like Mike. I look at old books and there's a lot of good information. And I think we need to go back to some of this stuff because there's way too many show ring fads that are happening. And if you look at these older pictures, these are all correct. These say what I say is a well put together horse. Hooves are under hips, very clear from this. Parallel cannon bones. Ball of the Hocks slightly in and parallel cannon bones, not cow hock. Cow hock is base wide, cannon bones almost touching. Correct is slightly in, just like I'm standing here, slightly in, toes out, slight toe out. That is correct. I don't know what happened in the show horse ring, but they are incorrect, and I'd be willing to talk to any judge or any breed association and tell them that. Next. This is one of my horses. If you flip back and forth, you can see she's just like the old drawing. Not that I have wonderful horses. Flip that back and now flip it ahead. You can see the plumb lines come the same way. This horse is nearly 20 years old. Plays really good polo. Never had a hock injection in his life. We used her with the Workman Black gait analysis system, and where they measure just about everything those feet can be doing, how long they're in the air, how they land, the durations, and this and that, how good the stride is. You can see it every which way. It's really cool stuff. And the presenters, when we put it on her, gasped when they saw all the values that were so correct. They said these are the most correct values we've seen when we put this on a horse. And this horse never had anything done to it, but look how nice she's built. Next. Here's a 30-year-old. This horse I euthanized at 34. I played him polo until he was 30. Never had a hock injection. Look at the natural cell carriage that he has on the right. This horse never had any maintenance done other than shoeing. Next. So, in conclusion, don't overcorrect. Next slide. Like that. So this is what I mean when the show ring creates fads. Yes, lateral support is important for horses' hind ends, but not like that. And somebody needs to tell the draft horse people to stop doing this stuff. I try, they don't listen. Next. So your take-home messages are hind end engagement and soundness is diminished with faulty conformation. I think I've made that clear. Physical forces can only be managed with proper geometry. Proper geometry is facilitated with trimming the hoof alignment for the load above. Horseshoes and modifications improve your geometry. Hind end engagement maintains front end soundness. Do not shoe hind feet like front feet. That's the biggest thing I want you to leave with. Shoe them as hind feet. Next. Oh, I'm done. Thank you. These are my guys. And I've ridden horses most of my life, and being able to feel the differences on trying my shoeing experiments really has taught me a lot of this. I've learned so much from these horses. I've ridden hundreds of horses coaching polo at Cornell, and we get a lot of donations. And getting on them and shoeing them really gives you a wide range of what that feel turns into. One more slide here. This is Vincent. He's another one of my horses. I bought him because nobody else wanted him because they couldn't ride a horse with frostbit ears. And but Vincent has a lot to say, and he says my ears ain't pretty, but I'm still playing polo at 20. So nobody wanted to ride a white-faced horse with frostbit ears. And thank you very much.